Dear brothers and sisters, welcome. Come on in, pull up a chair. I am so glad you are here today. I really am. Because what I want to talk to you about this morning is something that has been sitting on my heart for weeks now. And I have learned over a long life of faith that when something sits on your heart that long, the Lord is usually the one who put it there. So I am going to trust that and talk to you plainly the way I always do, because you deserve plain talk, and you deserve the truth, and you deserve someone who loves you enough to give you both without dressing them up in language that sounds nice but doesn't actually help you. I want to talk to you today about the chosen, about what it means to be chosen by God, about whether you are one of them, about the signs, and I do not mean mystical visions or supernatural fireworks. I mean the quiet, ordinary, unmistakable marks that appear in a soul that God has set apart for something. The marks that show up not on a certificate or a diploma or a spiritual resume, but in the texture of a life, in the way a person suffers, in the way a person loves, in the way a person keeps going when every reasonable human instinct says it is time to sit down and stop. Because I have a feeling, and I want you to hear this carefully, I have a feeling that some of you watching this right now do not know that you are chosen. You have lived your whole life feeling like you were on the outside of something, like other people had a faith that burned and a certainty that held and a sense of God's closeness that you could never quite access. Like everyone else, got a memo that you somehow missed. And you have been faithful anyway. You have shown up anyway. You have prayed your rosary and gone to Mass and raised your children in the faith and buried your dead and kept going through things that would have flattened a lesser soul. And you have done it all with this quiet, persistent, sometimes aching uncertainty about whether any of it was enough, whether you were enough, whether God really saw you, or whether you were just one face in a very large crowd. I want to talk to you today about that uncertainty. I want to look it in the eye, and then I want to tell you what the saints say, what Scripture says, what 2,000 years of Catholic wisdom about the spiritual life say about the people who carry exactly that feeling. Because what the tradition tells us about them is not what you might expect. And by the time we are finished today, I think something is going to shift in you. I believe that with everything I have got. So stay with me. We have a lot of ground to cover, and all of it matters. Let us begin with a question. What does it actually mean to be chosen by God? Now, most people, when they hear that phrase, picture something dramatic, a vision, a calling, a moment of blinding clarity in which God appears in some unmistakable way and says, I have picked you, here is your mission, go. They picture St. Paul knocked off his horse on the road to Damascus. They picture Joan of Arc hearing voices that told her to take up a sword. They picture the great mystics levitating in their chapel and receiving stigmata and seeing heavenly visions that left them weeping for days. And they think, well, none of that has happened to me, so I must not be one of the chosen ones. And I want to say to you, as directly and as lovingly as I know how, that you have misunderstood what being chosen looks like in the overwhelming majority of cases. Because the dramatic calls, the visions, and the voices, and the supernatural signs, those are the exceptions. Those are the rare and extraordinary ways in which God has called certain souls to certain very specific missions that required that kind of unmistakable direction. And even those souls, even Paul, even Joan, even the great mystics, spent most of their lives not in visions, but in the same grinding, ordinary, Faith requires effort, experience that you and I live every single day. The choosing of God is not primarily dramatic. It is primarily quiet. It is woven into the ordinary fabric of a life in ways that are only visible in retrospect, and sometimes only visible to God Himself until eternity reveals them. And the three marks I want to talk to you about today are not the marks of someone who has had extraordinary spiritual experiences. They are the marks of someone who has been in a real relationship with God long enough for that relationship to leave traces on the soul, the way a long marriage leaves traces on a face, the way years of labor leave traces on a pair of hands. Not showy, not dramatic, but unmistakable to anyone who knows what to look for. So let us look. The first mark of a chosen soul is this: they have been broken in a way that did not destroy them. Let me say that again, because I wanted to land. They have been broken in a way that did not destroy them. Every soul that God has ever used for something real has been broken first. I do not know a single exception to this in the entire history of the saints. Not one. You go through that list. You go through the canonized saints and the beatified and the great holy ones of every century, and you will find in every single life, without exception, a breaking, a loss, a failure, an illness, a betrayal, a darkness so profound that the person on the inside of it could not see any way through. A moment or a season or sometimes a decade in which everything that the soul had been relying on was taken away, and what remained was just the naked soul and God, with nothing in between.
Saint Teresa of Avila spent almost 20 years in what she herself described as a kind of spiritual mediocrity, going through the motions of religious life without any real interior fire,
before the conversion of her conversion, as she called it, that set her blazing in the second half of her life and turned her into the reformer and mystic and doctor of the church that she became 20 years. A woman of that caliber, 20 years of what she considered spiritual failure. Saint Therese of Lisieux, the little flower, the most popular saint of the modern era. The woman who gave us the little way of spiritual childhood and whose teaching on love has comforted more souls than almost any other in the history of the church, spent the last 18 months of her life in a darkness so dense she could barely believe in heaven. She who had built her whole spiritual life on trust in God's love faced a trial of faith at the end that she described as a tunnel with no light at the end of it. She did not stop loving. She did not stop trusting. But she did it in the dark, without consolation, without the felt sense of God's presence that had carried her before. And that darkness became part of her mission. She offered it, and God used it. And then there is Job. There is always Job, that ancient, magnificent, terrible story of a righteous man stripped of everything, his children, his wealth, his health, his dignity, his ability to make sense of what was happening to him and what God says about him at the end. God does not say Job was wrong to cry out. He does not say Job failed by questioning. He says Job spoke what was right and he restores him. The breaking was not the end of Job's story. It was the middle. The breaking was where the real Job emerged. The Job that was not sustained by his prosperity and his comfort and his excellent reputation, but by a faith that had been tested to its absolute limit and had held. Now I want to look at you. I want to look at the people watching this right now. And I want to ask, have you been broken? Have you had something taken from you, a person, a health, a dream, a decade of your life that went in a direction you never asked for and never would have chosen? Have you had a season in which God felt absent, in which the prayers went unanswered by any felt response, in which you kept going on nothing but the bare bones of faith, on the habit of prayer long after the feeling of prayer had deserted you? If the answer is yes, I want you to hear this. That is not evidence against your being chosen. That is evidence for it. Because God does not break what he does not intend to use. A craftsman does not put an ordinary piece of wood through the kiln. He puts through the kiln the wood he intends to make into something extraordinary. The heat is not cruelty. The heat is the process. And the soul that has been through the kiln and has come out on the other side, still believing, still loving, still here, is a soul that has been prepared for something that the unbroken soul is not yet capable of. I am not romanticizing suffering. I want to be clear about that. Suffering is real and it is terrible, and it is allowed, it is right to bring it to God in honesty and to ask why and to weep and to demand an accounting. The Psalms are full of exactly that kind of prayer, and God put them in Scripture on purpose. The soul that has never cried out to God in pain is a soul that has not yet been in a real enough relationship with Him to be completely honest. Honesty with God is one of the marks of intimacy, and intimacy is what He is after in every life He touches. But what I am saying is this: if you have been broken, and if the breaking did not destroy you, and if you are here, still in the faith, still praying, still looking for God even when He seems hard to find, then the first mark is on you, and you should know it. You should recognize it for what it is. Not as a badge of suffering to be displayed, but as a quiet confirmation that God has been at work in you in the most fundamental and most serious way He works in souls He intends to use. The second mark of a chosen soul is this: they love in a way that costs them something. Now, this is one that I want to spend some time on, because it is perhaps the most misunderstood of the three. When people think of the great loves of the saints, they often think of dramatic gestures. St. Maximilian Kolbe stepping forward in Auschwitz to take the place of a condemned man and dying of starvation in his stead. St. Damien of Molokai going to the leper colony on Molokai and staying until he himself became a leper and died there among the people he had loved. St. Teresa of Calcutta picking up the dying from the gutters of Calcutta and carrying them to a house where they could die with dignity. And those loves are real, and they are beautiful, and they are among the most luminous things human beings have ever done. But most of us are not called to Auschwitz or to Molokai or to Calcutta. Most of us are called to the kitchen table and the hospital waiting room, and the phone call we make to the person nobody else is calling, and the visit we pay to the nursing home resident who has not had a visitor in 3 months. Most of us are called to the love that is quiet and consistent and entirely unspectacular, and costs us not our lives in a dramatic single moment, but our time and our energy and our preferences and our comfort day after day after day, in ways that nobody sees and nobody celebrates and nobody would make a movie about. And I want to tell you something about that love. That love is among the most powerful forces in the universe. Not because of its drama, because of its fidelity, because of its dailiness, because of the sheer, stubborn, sometimes exhausted decision made over and over again in the ordinary moments of an ordinary life to choose the other person over yourself, to pick up the phone when you do not want to visit when you are tired, to stay when it would be easier to leave, to forgive when the wound is still fresh and the justice in you says it is too soon. St. John of the Cross said that at the evening of life we shall be judged on love, not on our productivity, not on our success, not on our theological knowledge or our church attendance record or our position in the parish hierarchy, on love. And love, in his understanding and in the understanding of the whole tradition he represented, is not primarily a feeling. It is a choice made repeatedly in the face of costs, in the absence of reward, in the full knowledge that what you are giving may never be recognized or returned. Here is a question I want you to sit with. Is there someone in your life who is harder to love than anyone else? Someone who takes more than they give, who exhausts more than they energizes, who has perhaps hurt you in ways you did not deserve and who continues to need from you in ways that push every limit of your patience and your generosity? Is there someone you have chosen to love anyway? Not because it was easy, not because they earned it, but because something in you, something placed there by grace rather than by nature, would not let you stop. If there is, you are carrying the second mark. Because that kind of love, the love that is chosen rather than felt, the love that is willed in the absence of natural affection or in the presence of real pain, is not something the unaided human heart is capable of for very long. It requires something supernatural. It requires the grace of God operating in a soul that has said yes to that grace, often without realizing they were saying yes to anything at all. Just getting up one more time and making one more phone call and showing up one more time for one more person who needed them, without knowing that each of those small, unremarkable decisions was being received by God as an act of profound love. The saints are not primarily people who did extraordinary things. They are people who did ordinary things with extraordinary love. And the love was extraordinary not because it felt extraordinary, but because it was real, because it held, because it did not quit. I have known people like this in my life, and I suspect you have too. Not famous people, not people whose names appear in books, people who sat by bedsides for months without complaint, people who fed and bathed and dressed someone they loved whose mind had gone away, and who did it with a gentleness that broke your heart to witness. People who prayed for the person who had wronged them, not once in a burst of magnanimity, but every day for years quietly without telling anyone, because they could not make themselves stop. People who gave money they could not afford to give, and time they could not afford to spare, because someone needed it and they were the one who happened to be there. That is the second mark. And if you see it in yourself, even imperfectly, even inconsistently, even mixed up with selfishness and resentment and the very human desire to be noticed and thanked, it is still there. Grace works through imperfect instruments. That is practically the definition of grace. The love that holds even when it is impure is more impressive in a way than the love that holds when it is easy. Because difficult love, persistent love, costly love is the love that has been tested, and tested love is real love. And real love is what God is making in a soul He intends to keep. The third mark of a chosen soul is this: they have a suffering they have never been able to explain to anyone else, and they have offered it anyway. I want to be very precise about what I mean by this, because there are different kinds of unexplainable suffering, and I am talking about a specific one. I am not talking about mental illness, though mental illness is real and serious and deserves proper care. I am not talking about physical illness alone, though physical illness is part of what I mean. I am talking about the kind of suffering that does not have a clean diagnosis or a social category or a satisfying explanation, the kind that you cannot quite describe to another person in a way that makes them fully understand, the kind that has no obvious external cause but that is deeply, persistently real. The mystical tradition of the Church has a name for this. It is called the dark night of the soul, from St. John of the Cross, and it is perhaps the most misused phrase in the Catholic vocabulary because people apply it to every experience of spiritual dryness or difficult season. But what St. John actually meant by it was something very specific and very profound. He meant the state in which God, in his wisdom and his love, withdraws the felt consolations of the spiritual life from a soul that has grown dependent on them in order to purify the soul's love and deepen its faith beyond the level of feeling. In order to take the soul from loving God because it feels good to love God, to loving God because God is God and is worth loving regardless of how it feels. This is an advanced spiritual state, not in the sense of being reserved for the elite, but in the sense that it requires a certain maturity of faith to navigate without being destroyed by it. And the people who are in it, who are going through it, who have been in it for years sometimes, are frequently the people who look from the outside like they are failing at the spiritual life. They are the people who say, I do not feel God anymore. I pray, but the prayers feel like they go nowhere. I go to Mass, but the Mass feels dry and distant. I am doing all the things I have always done, and something that used to be alive in my faith has gone very quiet, and I do not know if it is coming back. And the temptation for a person in that state is to conclude that God has left them, that they have done something wrong, that the dryness is evidence of spiritual failure rather than spiritual progress. St. John of the Cross, and after him St. Therese, and after her the entire stream of Orthodox Catholic mystical theology says precisely the opposite. The dark night is not God's absence. It is God's presence in a form the spiritual senses cannot register. It is God doing his deepest work in the soul, the work of purification that cannot happen when the soul is comfortable and consoled and relying on its feelings as evidence of God's love. And the soul that continues to love and to pray and to show up for God in the dark night without the consolation that used to make it easy, without the felt sense of his closeness that used to sustain it, is a soul that is being taught the most important lesson the spiritual life has to offer. It is being taught that faith is not a feeling, that love is not a sensation, that God does not stop being God because you have stopped feeling him, that the darkness is not the end of the story, that the darkness is in fact precisely where the deepest transformation happens. And this is where the offering comes in, because this is what distinguishes the chosen soul from the soul that simply endures. The chosen soul at some point in the darkness makes a decision, consciously or unconsciously, explicitly or simply through the continued habit of fidelity. They make the decision to offer the suffering, to say, I do not understand this. I cannot explain this. I cannot make this feel meaningful right now. But I give it to you. I place it in your hands. I offer this darkness and this dryness and this pain and this uncertainty as a prayer, as a sacrifice, as a gift, even though it does not feel like a gift, and I do not know if you are receiving it. I give it anyway. That offering is one of the most powerful acts a human soul can perform, because it is faith stripped of every support. It is love stripped of every feeling. It is the will choosing God in the pure darkness without any help from the emotions or the senses or the felt assurance of God's presence. And when the will makes that choice in that nakedness, it is doing something that even the angels who live always in the full light of God's presence cannot do. It is an act of faith that is only possible for a creature that lives between the light and the dark, between the certain and the uncertain, between the felt and the unfelt. It is an act of faith that God, for reasons we will understand more fully in eternity, treasures above almost anything else a soul can offer him. Now, I want to bring these three marks together because I want you to see the pattern they form. I want you to see what kind of life they describe when they are all present in the same soul. They describe a life that has been broken and has held, a life that has loved at cost and kept loving, a life that has suffered in ways it could not fully explain and has offered that suffering to God in the darkness without waiting for the light to return first. They describe, in other words, a life that looks from the outside like an ordinary Catholic life, maybe a difficult one, maybe one that has had more than its share of loss or pain or darkness, but ordinary in the sense that it has no dramatic miracles to point to, no visions or locutions or supernatural signs, no obvious reason for anyone to write a book about it or make a documentary about it or call it anything other than a faithful Catholic life lived in the ordinary circumstances of an ordinary world. And what I want to tell you, what I believe with everything I have, is that this ordinary life, this broken and loving and suffering and offering life, is the life that God finds most beautiful. Not because suffering is beautiful in itself, it is not, but because what it reveals in the soul that carries it faithfully is the image of His Son. Because what it produces in the soul that offers it is the likeness of Christ crucified, which is the likeness God has always been trying to bring forth in every soul He has ever created. When Christ hung on the cross, there was nothing dramatic about it from the outside. There was a man dying in agony in a way that thousands of men had died before and would die again. There was nothing to the eye of the world to distinguish this death from any other Roman execution. And yet it was the most important moment in the history of the universe, because it was the infinite love of God poured out through the finite suffering of a human body, offered freely and completely for the salvation of every soul that had ever lived or ever would live. The drama was entirely invisible. The power was entirely interior. The world walked by and did not see it. And that is what God is doing in the hidden lives of the chosen. He is pouring His infinite love through their finite suffering, through their broken and healing hearts, through their costly and imperfect love, through their offered and unexplained darkness. He is doing something in those hidden lives that has infinite spiritual weight and infinite spiritual consequence, even though it looks from the outside like nothing much is happening. Even though the person living it cannot usually see it themselves. You are not nothing. Your life is not nothing. The faithfulness you have maintained through things that would have broken a lesser person is not nothing. The love you have given when you had very little left to give is not nothing. The prayer you have prayed in the dark, in the dryness, in the uncertainty, when you were not sure anyone was listening, is not nothing. It is not lost. It is not wasted. It is being held by the one who holds everything. And it is doing things in the spiritual order of the universe that you will not fully understand until you stand before him and he shows you. I believe that with every fiber of my being. I believe it because the saints have told us it is true. I believe it because the mystics who were given glimpses of God's perspective on human lives have come back and told us with a consistency and a conviction that spans centuries and cultures that the small, hidden, faithful life is among the most precious things in creation. That the soul who prays in the dark and loves at cost and offers its suffering without fanfare and keeps going, when it has every human reason to stop, is a soul that God regards with a tenderness and a pride that we would find staggering if we could see it. You are seen. I want to say that directly to you, whoever you are, wherever you are sitting with this right now, you are seen. Your faithfulness is seen. Your suffering is seen. Your love is seen. Every rosary you prayed when your heart was not in it. Every mass you attended when your body was barely cooperating. Every act of care you gave when you were exhausted and the person you were caring for did not thank you and the God you were serving seemed very far away. All of it is seen. All of it is held. All of it is being woven by hands you cannot see into something that will last forever. The three marks of the chosen soul are the marks of Christ: broken and holding, loving at cost, suffering in the dark and offering anyway. If those marks are on you, do not be ashamed of them. Do not wish them away. Do not look at the shiny, comfortable, apparently successful lives around you and conclude that you have somehow missed the better path. You have not missed anything. You are on the path that goes deepest. You are on the path that goes home. And I want you to do something today. I want you to take a few minutes after this video is finished and sit quietly with God, not with a prayer you have to perform correctly, not with a list of things you need to ask for. Just sit and let yourself be seen. Tell him what you are carrying. Tell him about the breaking and the costs and the darkness, if they are present in your life right now. And then tell him that you give it. However imperfectly, however uncertainly, tell him that you give it, that you place it in his hands, that you trust him with it even when trust is the hardest thing in the world. Because that trust offered in the darkness is the most beautiful prayer a human soul can pray. And he receives it. I promise you, he receives it. And he will answer it in his time and in his way, in a language of love and purpose that you may not hear right now, but that you will one day understand. And on that day, everything will make sense. Every breaking and every cost and every darkness will make perfect, luminous, overwhelming sense. And you will see what he was making all along. And you will not be able to stop weeping with gratitude. Hold on, dear friend. Keep going. The marks you carry are not wounds. They are the fingerprints of God on a soul he has been shaping for a very long time. And he does not shape what he does not love. He does not shape what he does not intend to keep. Now, dear brothers and sisters, if you have stayed with me all the way to this moment, I want to say something to you from the heart. I do not think you found this video today by accident. I think the good Lord put it in front of you because there was something here you needed to hear. Maybe it was the first mark and you needed someone to tell you that your breaking was not a failure. Maybe it was the second and you needed someone to name the costly love you have been giving without recognition. Maybe it was the third and you needed someone to look at your darkness and call it what it actually is, which is holy ground. Whatever it was, I hope it reached you. I hope it landed somewhere real and true and lasting in your heart. And if it did, I want to ask you to do one thing for me. Subscribe to this channel right down there below this video, because every single week we go deeper into the truths that matter most, the truths that speak to where you actually are, the truths that the faith has always held about suffering and love and the hidden life and the God who sees everything and wastes nothing. You deserve to know all of it, every word of it. So subscribe and come back and bring someone you love with you. And I will see you in the next one. God bless you, God keep you, and know that you are chosen.